You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we're previewing the semi-finals of the ICC Cricket World Cup for 2023 between India and New Zealand and South Africa and Australia. 10 teams started this Cricket World Cup, only 4 remain, and they are India, New Zealand, Australia and South Africa. Who will be the teams to qualify for the final? We will find out in the next few days in these 2 semi-finals, but we're in for what will be a couple of exciting semi-finals in this World Cup, and obviously the 2 best teams will emerge and will play each other in the final this Sunday in Ahmedabad. So we can't wait. There's lots to talk about in this episode of the podcast today. Let's preview the first semi-final between India and New Zealand, and that will be from the 1KD Stadium in Mumbai. And this is a replay of the 2019 semi-final at Old Trafford, where New Zealand won against India by 18 runs in that semi-final that lasted 2 days because of the rain. So we had to use the reserve day back in 2019, but New Zealand got the job done. India, another semi-final loss in a World Cup event, and New Zealand went on to play that epic final against England at Lord's in 2019. So it's a rematch of that semi-final from 2019. This time around it's different. It's in India, different conditions, and India have been playing some good cricket in this World Cup. So it's going to be a test for New Zealand. So let's talk about India and their chances in this semi-final and how they got here to the semi-finals. First of all, let's have a look back at their results in this tournament. So their road to the semi-finals. Their first game against Australia, they won by 6 wickets. They defeated Afghanistan by 8 wickets. They defeated Pakistan by 7 wickets. They defeated Bangladesh by 7 wickets. They defeated New Zealand by 4 wickets. They defeated England by 100 runs. They defeated Sri Lanka by 302 runs. They defeated South Africa by 243 runs. And their last game against the Netherlands, they defeated them by 160 runs. So a perfect record for India, winning 9 games from 9. And the only team that didn't play was themselves. So it would have been 10-0 if they played against themselves. But 9-0, perfect record. They dominated throughout the group stage. The batting and bowling has been very strong. The likes of Kohli, Rohit Sharma, Gill, Shami, Bumrah and Jadeja, just to name a few, with their batting and bowling. It's pretty much India's World Cup to lose, pretty much. They've got all bases covered in the batting and the bowling department. Their fielding's been good. They're the team to beat. So not too many weaknesses they have, India. They're pretty strong in all departments. And I mentioned the batting and the bowling. Very strong indeed. You have a look at their batters. You know, Virat Kohli, obviously he's had a pretty good tournament. 594 runs. Rohit Sharma, 503 runs. Shreyas Iyer, 421 runs. KL Rahul, 347 runs. Shubman Gill, 266 runs. So, you know, that's only the top 5 run scorers for India in this World Cup, and they've been pretty good in all the games they've played in. Their bowling is very good as well. Very dominant. Jasprit Bumrah, 17 wickets. 16 wickets for Jadeja and Shami. 14 for Kuldeep Yadav. And 12 for Mohammad Siraj. So, the top 5 leading wicket takers for India in this World Cup. Pretty dominant, pretty strong. They've taken wickets in every game, and that's why India have been able to get the job done. The batters have got it done with the bat, scoring the runs, and the bowlers have taken wickets when needed. So, as I said, it's a pretty strong Indian team. It's their World Cup to lose, and they don't have too many weaknesses, India. But I think the one area where they could be undone is the pressure of a semi-final, and we know the history of India in semi-finals. It's not a great track record. They always crumble for some reason under pressure. You would think that this Indian team, being so talented the way it has been for many, many years, They're spoilt for choice when it comes to talent. You would feel like they should have won a few World Cups by now, but in reality they haven't. The last ICC event that India won was the Champions Trophy, and that was back in 2013. And obviously the last World Cup they won was back in 2011, which was here in India. So I think the only challenge that India will have is trying to get over the mental barrier and hurdle of trying to cope with the pressure in a semi-final. And the only team who can beat India is themselves. And what I mean by that is that they should be able to win, they should be able to get the job done, but the only way India are going to lose a semi-final or a final is themselves. And that's the battle of the mind and the mental side of the game. Can they overcome that? That's the question. And as we know, that in semi-finals and knockouts, it's a different sort of pressure compared to a group stage match. Yep, they've won all 9 games. They finished on top. They've played their best cricket throughout the tournament. The only other team to do that and go on to win the World Cup was Australia back in 2003 and 2007, where they went undefeated in both of those tournaments. India have done the same. But the question is, can they win? Can they win the tournament? That is the next question. Looking back at India's record in Cricket World Cup semi-finals, looking back at the last 2 semi-finals, in 2015, the semi-final against Australia in Sydney, they lost by 95 runs. The last World Cup in 2019 against New Zealand, which I mentioned earlier, they lost by 18 runs. And also in the T20 World Cup last year, against England in Adelaide, they lost by 10 wickets. So they don't have a great track record when it comes to semi-finals, India. So that is the only challenge that I see India being tested in. No doubt about it, New Zealand will give them a good challenge, because in the game that India and New Zealand played in the group stage, India only won by 4 wickets. New Zealand gave them a good challenge in that game at Dharamshala, and no doubt they'll do the same in the semi-final. But it's a different sort of pressure from the group stage to the semi-finals. That's the main barrier for India to overcome. That's the only sign of weakness that I see from this Indian team. Apart from that, look, they're a pretty good team. As I mentioned, good batting, good bowling. They're very strong. They've got all bases covered. So that is the only challenge that India will have in the semi-final against New Zealand. And also the pressure of the crowd. The crowd will be cheering them on, the pressure of the crowd behind them. Can they channel that, and can they put in a good performance? Because it will be pretty disappointing that they've won 9 games in the group stage, you come to the semi-final and knockout, and then you lose. And that's pretty hard to take, and that's pretty disappointing. So they will not want to do that. They will want to win well against New Zealand, but nothing's guaranteed in a semi-final. It doesn't matter that you've won 9 games in a row in the group stage. Yes, that's good, and it was good for them to really qualify early on for the semi-finals. That's the hard work. Now, it's going to get even tougher in the semi-final because you need to try and win. And it's a knockout. It's a different sort of pressure. You lose, you're out. That's the end of your tournament. So it's all well and good finishing on top, winning 9 games from 9, but can India get the job done? That's the biggest challenge for them. No doubt about it, they will know that. They will play on their minds. But I think for them, it's just to go out there and try and play the way they've been playing in this tournament thus far. But that will be the big test for them. Can they handle the occasion? Can they handle the expectations and the pressure? Otherwise, it's going to be another semi-final loss, potentially. Apart from that, let's have a look at the potential 11 that India may roll out for the semi-final against New Zealand. So the potential 11 could be Rohit Sharma, Gill, Kohli, Iyer, Rahul, Suryakumar Yadav, Jadeja, Bumrah, Shami, Kuldeep Yadav and Siraj. That's a pretty strong 11. That's the 11 that they've played with for the last few games of the group stage. So I won't be surprised if India roll out that 11 for this semi-final against New Zealand. It's a pretty strong 11, and they should be capable of getting the job done. Just to finish off about India before we move on and talk about New Zealand. India start as firm favourites in the semi-final against New Zealand. Obviously, New Zealand will go into this as the underdogs, but with that, being the favourites, comes expectations. People expect you to win after what was a very good group stage performance, winning 9 games from 9. But the challenge for India, and the question is, can they get the job done? Can they overcome the curse of the semi-final and go on and win the semi-final and go through to the final and potentially win it? We will have to wait and see in this game against New Zealand. And then we can make up our own mind after that. But for India, they start off as favourites in this game. You would think they should win, but it's not guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed in the semi-final. They will have to earn it in this game against New Zealand, because New Zealand will give them a good challenge. And New Zealand, as we will talk about in a minute, are a team that will give it a good go and give it a good fight, as they always do. But for India, they've got all the ingredients. They've got good batting, they've got good bowling, they've got all bases covered. They should be able to get the job done. But can they get it done? That is the question. Let's talk about New Zealand and their chances in this semi-final and how they got here to the semi-finals. Well, let's have a look back at New Zealand's road to the semi-finals and look back at their group stage performances and how they got here. Their first game of the tournament was a convincing win over England. They won by 9 wickets. They defeated the Netherlands by 99 runs. They defeated Bangladesh by 8 wickets. They defeated Afghanistan by 149 runs. And then they started on a losing streak. They lost against India by 4 wickets. They lost to Australia by 5 runs in a very close match at Dharamshala. They lost to South Africa by a heavy margin of 190 runs. They lost to Pakistan by 21 runs on Duckworth-Lewis after scoring 400 in Bangalore. And in their final group match of the tournament, to qualify for the semi-finals, they defeated Sri Lanka by 5 wickets to scrape through into the semi-finals. So that's how New Zealand performed in the group stage and how they got here to the semi-finals. For New Zealand, as I mentioned, the tournament started well for them. Winning their first 4 games of the tournament. Everyone thought that they were going to qualify for the semi-finals quite easily. And then they lost the next 4 games against India, Australia, South Africa and Pakistan, which really set them back in terms of their qualification hopes for the semi-finals. Also, they didn't have the full squad available to them. Also, in that losing streak, they had players going down with injuries. Obviously, Matt Henry, one of their best bowlers, went down with a hamstring injury. Kane Williamson had injuries as well, Tim Southey. So they didn't have their full squad available. But they were able to get the job done and qualify for the semi-finals. And people thought then, when they lost those four games on the trot to India, Australia, South Africa and Pakistan, everyone thought New Zealand were out of this semi-final race. But in the end, as I mentioned, they did enough to qualify for the semi-finals. Obviously, for New Zealand, playing in their 3rd consecutive Cricket World Cup semi-final, which is a fantastic achievement. 2015, 2019, and now 2023. 3 World Cup semi-finals in a row is a fantastic achievement for New Zealand. But they haven't been able to go on and win the tournament. They made the final in 2 of the World Cups. Obviously, 2015, they got defeated by Australia by a very dominant performance by Australia in 2015. They lost to England in that epic match in 2019 in the final. Can 2023 be the year the New Zealand finally win the World Cup? Well, they're up against an Indian side that are pretty good, and they've got to test them. And India start off as favourites, but also New Zealand start off as underdogs. And I think New Zealand will relish that. They always have the underdog tag, and they always relish being the underdogs, and they always put in good performances. They have a pretty good batting and bowling lineup. They've got strong batters. You got the likes of Conway, Rachin Ravinda. You got Williamson, Daryl Mitchell. which is a pretty good batting lineup. You've got good bowlers as well. You've got Mitchell Satner, Lockie Ferguson, Tim Southey, Trent Boult. So they've got all bases covered just about. And they've got a pretty good team. But also, as I mentioned before, plagued by injuries, which didn't help. And that's why their tournament was a little bit stop-start, up and down. The challenges for New Zealand in this game against India, well, obviously for New Zealand, they will know that they do have the wood over India in semi-finals. Obviously, the semi-final in 2019 at Old Trafford, they won that game. So they do have a bit of an advantage over India when it comes to the mental side, knowing that we've already defeated India in a semi-final before. We can do it again, but this time is a bit different. India are playing well. It's at home. It's in India, not in England. So it's going to be a different set of challenges for this New Zealand team. I feel like for New Zealand, the main challenges are going to be how to combat India's bowlers, scoring runs or chasing runs in a high-pressure situation. So for New Zealand to win, you will probably think their batters and the batting group will probably need to score over 350 runs plus minimum here at the 1KT Stadium. It's quite a high-scoring ground here at 1KT. So they will need 350 plus minimum if they're batting first, and their batters will need to stand up. If they're chasing a target, which India are setting, they will need to bat well and bat smart, but they will also need to put India's bowlers under pressure. Now, we haven't seen that from many of the teams in this tournament. India's bowlers haven't been put under pressure. Now, for New Zealand to win, they will need to do that. They will need to put India's bowlers under pressure. Make sure Bumrah and Shami and Siraj, get them off their line and length. Put pressure on Jadeja and Kuldeep Yadav, the spinners. Make Rohit Sharma go to another option, because with India, they don't have an all-round option because of Hardik Pandya's injury. So Rohit Sharma doesn't have... Well, he has options, of course. The bowlers I just mentioned before are good options to have. But if they're copping some tap by the New Zealand batters and they're under pressure, he doesn't have any options to go to because there's no Hardik Pandya, there's no all-rounder in the side for India. So New Zealand can definitely exploit that. And their batters are capable of doing that. As we've seen in this tournament, Rachin Ravindra, he's been a revelation for New Zealand in this World Cup. He's got 2 centuries. He's batted really well. He's going to be key. 565 runs for him for the tournament. Daryl Mitchell, 418 runs. Devon Conway, 359 runs. Glenn Phillips, 244 runs. And then you've got Kane Williamson, 187. And Tom Latham, 155. So they've got the batters who can do it and put big scores on the board and put India's bowlers under pressure. But I feel like for New Zealand, with the bat, they've got to set a big target if they're batting first, 350 plus minimum. If they're chasing, they've got to put India's bowlers under pressure if they are going to win the semi-final. In terms of the bowling side of things, their bowlers will need to take early wickets. That's an obvious statement to make. But against this Indian side with a very strong top order and a very strong middle order, they will need to take early wickets early to put them under some sort of pressure. You've got to make inroads early, because with this Indian side, what we saw in the game that India played against England, if you get them under a little bit of pressure and expose that long tail, because they do have a long tail, after Jadeja, it is quite long. You've got Bumrah, Shami and Kuldeep Yadav and Siraj. So it is quite a long tail. So you can exploit that. So New Zealand will need early wickets. They need to make early inroads. And their bowlers are capable of doing that. Obviously, Mitchell Satner, leading wicket taker for New Zealand, 16 wickets for him. He's bowled very well, the left-arm spinner. And then you've got Trent Boult, he's pretty good, as we know, 13 wickets for him. Lockie Ferguson with 10. Tim Southey with 4. So their bowlers will need to make early inroads to put some sort of pressure on So for New Zealand, those are the challenges. Their batters will need to stand up. Their bowlers will need to stand up as well. Are they capable of getting the job done? Absolutely. They find a way, New Zealand. Being the underdogs, they always find a way to fight, punch above their weight, and get the job done in semi-finals. We've seen that over the years from them. In ICC events, they tend to play well. And I think the other thing for New Zealand to do is to silence the crowd. The crowd will definitely boost India. So if New Zealand can do well with bat and ball, and if they can silence the crowd, I think that will help their cause of winning this game against India. Also, try and put India under some sort of pressure. They're capable of doing it, New Zealand, but it is a challenge. It's like David versus Goliath, in a way. So they are the underdogs, but you never know. It's a semi-final. Anything can happen. Now, in terms of the potential 11 for New Zealand that they may select for this semi-final against India, so let's talk about that. So potential 11 for New Zealand for this semi-final could be Conway, Ravinder, Williamson, Mitchell, Chapman, Phillips, Latham, Satner, Ferguson, Southey and Bolt. And that's a pretty good 11. And it's probably the best 11 that they can put out on the park, to be honest, with the amount of injuries that they've had. But definitely the 11 that they select can definitely get the job done. They've got the players who can do it. They've got talented players. They've got skilled players. It's just they will need to play at their best, New Zealand, if they are going to win this game. They started as underdogs, but don't discount them. They can always find a way to get the job done. So in finishing off about New Zealand and this first semi-final, before we move on to talk about South Africa and Australia, in that second semi-final, for New Zealand, they will need to play at their absolute best to win this game against India. It's going to be a challenge, but they're capable of overcoming this challenge. But they will need to execute with bat, ball, and in the field if they are going to go on to win this semi-final and to play in the final in Ahmedabad. Let's preview the second semi-final between South Africa and Australia from Eden Gardens. And this semi-final is a rematch of the semi-finals that Australia and South Africa have played back in 1999, which was the famous game of the 1999 World Cup, the semi-final at Edgbaston, the famous tied game, the run-out, Australia winning, going through to the final to win their World Cup title. And then 2007, both the teams played in that semi-final in the Caribbean. Australia won by 7 wickets. So Australia do have the edge over South Africa when it comes to semi-finals. They've met in 2 semi-finals before this one. This will be the third encounter in semi-finals in World Cups for South Africa and Australia. As I mentioned, the previous 2, as I mentioned before, 1999, the famous game, of course, and then 2007, Australia got the job done there. South Africa will definitely need to play well if they are going to beat Australia in this semi-final. So this semi-final in 2023 could live up to the previous semi-final encounters, and it could be one of the best between the two countries in World Cup cricket in terms of performances, and could live up to expectations, but we'll have to wait and see. Let's talk about South Africa first of all, and talk about their chances in the semi-final against Australia and how they got here to the semi-finals. First of all, let's have a look at their road to the semi-finals, how they got here, how they qualified. Their first game against Sri Lanka was a convincing win. They won by 102 runs. They defeated Australia by 134 runs. They lost to the Netherlands by 38 runs. They defeated England by 229 runs. They defeated Bangladesh by 149 runs. They defeated Pakistan by 1 wicket. They defeated New Zealand by 190 runs. They lost to India by 243 runs. And their final match of the group stage, they won against Afghanistan by 5 wickets to qualify for the semi-finals. South Africa, as we know with them in World Cups, it's been up and down. It's been a very difficult journey for them in World Cup cricket. Obviously, being tagged with the chokers tag. The semi-finals for South Africa have been mixed in World Cups over the years. Obviously, 1992 against England, which was at the SCG. That semi-final, they didn't win. They needed 22 off one ball because of the rain and obviously the old rules back then. This was before Duckworth-Lewis, and South Africa missed out on potentially a semi-final berth. Potentially a World Cup final, sorry. But unfortunately, they weren't able to do it. And they had a bit of bad luck in 1992. Obviously, 1999, as I mentioned, that semi-final against Australia at Edgbaston, the tied match, the pressure got to them, they crumbled, and they pretty much couldn't capitalise in that game, which was unfortunate. 2007, against Australia in the Caribbean, they lost that game by 7 wickets. Another opportunity that they let slip through their hands. And 2015, the semi-final against New Zealand, Grant Elliott took the game away after that wonderful innings in the run chase to get them over the line in Eden Park in Auckland. And 2023, could this be the year and the time for South Africa to win the World Cup? Could it be the opportunity to get rid of the chokers tag for good? We will have to wait and see. As I mentioned, they played well in the group stage. They lost 2 games to the Netherlands and India. The Netherlands loss was a bit of a shock result. The game against India was a disappointing result because they got absolutely hammered in Eden Gardens. They got bowled out for 80 odd. They have a strong batting lineup. The likes of de Kock, Van der Dussen, Markram, Klaassen, Miller. They've got a very good bowling attack. They've got Janssen, Maharaj, Rabada, Ngidi. So they've got a pretty good, strong batting lineup and bowling lineup, South Africa. And there's not too many weaknesses for them. Obviously, when they've been batting first, they've scored big runs. But the only weakness that South Africa have is chasing in this World Cup. When chasing, they've struggled. In particular, the game against the Netherlands, they were chasing and they got bowled out, and that was a horrible performance by them. The game against India, they were chasing, got bowled out for 80 odd. The game against Pakistan, they were chasing and they won by 1 wicket. That wasn't really convincing, but they were able to get over the line. And the game against Afghanistan, which was the last game of the tournament for them in the group stage, they were chasing in that game and they were able to get the job done. And it was a bit more of a clinical performance by South Africa chasing in that game against Afghanistan. But if you have to pick one weakness, chasing is that for South Africa. And they will need to fix that in the semi-final against Australia, because if they're chasing in a semi-final, it's a different sort of pressure in a knockout situation. Also with South Africa, they've got that bit of the chokers tag as well, in terms of that hanging over their heads, that sort of stigma around the team, which doesn't help either. So that's their one weakness, South Africa, is chasing. If they bat first, they look like $1 million. The top order, the middle order, de Kock's had a good World Cup, leading run scorer for South Africa, and up there as the leading run scorer in the tournament, 591 runs. Then you got Van der Dussen, 442 runs, Markram, 396, Klaassen, 326, David Miller, 255, Bavuma, 145, the captain. He hasn't had the high scores that he would have wanted, but you have a look at those numbers. It's a pretty good batting lineup for South Africa. Good top order, good middle order. So it will be challenging for their batters if they are chasing in a semi-final. It's a different sort of pressure, as I mentioned. So the top order, the middle order, if that fires for South Africa, they look good. If you put them under some sort of pressure, as we saw in the game against the Netherlands, Pakistan, and India, those teams put South Africa under pressure when chasing, and they crumbled. So that will be one area that Australia will be looking to exploit in the semi-final. And we'll talk about that when we talk about Australia in just a moment. So for South Africa, it's a real problem. I don't think they've quite fixed it. But they'll be able just to work out what we need to do better. So for South Africa, they can't really control what happens at the toss. If they are chasing, and if Australia win the toss, they're chasing, they will need to try and adapt to that. But that's the one weakness that I see from the South African team. Other than that, if they bat first, they're going to put some big runs on the board, and it's going to be a challenge for Australia, as it has been for many teams in this World Cup when bowling to South Africa when they've been batting first. So they've got the batters to score runs. Can they do it under pressure when they're chasing? That's the next question for South Africa. And that's the only one weakness that I see, really. Apart from that, another challenge for South Africa is, can they handle the pressure of a semi-final knockout? Now, for many of the team, this is the first time that they're playing in a knockout semi-final in a World Cup. Now, I think going back to 2015, I think there's only 2 players from the squad that played in that 2015 semi-final, and I think that's Quinton de Kock and David Miller. The rest of them weren't a part of the setup back in 2015 in that World Cup. So for most of the team, barring de Kock and Miller, who played in that semi-final against New Zealand in 2015, they haven't played in a semi-final before in a World Cup. So it's going to be a new experience for them. So can they handle the pressure? Can they get rid of the chokers tag? You know, South Africa have played some good cricket in this World Cup, but it's now the crunch time. This is where you need to do the job, get the business done. You know, trying to win this semi-final, because they're up against an Australian team who have been resurging. Australia have done well to come back and qualify for the semis, so it's going to be a big test for South Africa. But I think for South Africa to win, if they're batting first, they need their batters to score big. If they're chasing, they will need to chase well and handle that pressure a bit better than they have done in this tournament. For their bowlers, they will need to just, you know, take wickets early, and they're capable of doing that to put Australia under some sort of pressure. So South Africa can do it. But they will need to play at their best against this Australian team. Anything can happen in a semi-final. Now, in terms of potential 11 for South Africa, so potential 11 that they may select for the semi-final against Australia, let's talk about that. So the potential 11 that South Africa may select for the semi-final against Australia could be de Kock, Bavuma, van der Dussen, Markram, Klaasen, Miller, Janssen, Maharaj, Rabada, Ngidi, and Coetzee. Now that's a pretty good team that South Africa may select for the semi-final. All of them have done well in this tournament, have put in some good performances. So just to finish off about South Africa before we talk about Australia, they can do it, South Africa. They've got the ability to do it, but can they get the job done? Can they get rid of the stigma of the choking tag? Can they banish that for good? That will be the question. Can they handle the pressure? Can they compete with Australia in this semi-final? We will have to wait and see. But, you know, they've got the team to do it. They've got good batting, good bowling. They just need to believe in themselves. And if they do that, they can get the job done. But we will have to wait and see at the end of this match whether or not they can do it or not. So they're capable, but I'll go back to that question again. Can they get it done, and can they cope with the pressure? That's the big test for South Africa. Let's talk about Australia and their chances in this semi-final against South Africa and how they got here to qualify for the semi-finals. So let's have a look back at Australia's road to the semi-finals in the group stage. How did they ended up qualifying for the semi-finals? The first game against India wasn't a good start. They lost by 6 wickets. They lost to South Africa by 134 runs. They lost the first 2 games. They were on the back foot early. But then Australia were on a 7-game winning streak, and they turned things around. They defeated Sri Lanka by 5 wickets. They defeated Pakistan by 62 runs. They defeated the Netherlands by a whopping 309 runs. They defeated New Zealand by 5 runs and a very close encounter at Dharamshala. They defeated England by 33 runs. They defeated Afghanistan by 3 wickets, a game that they shouldn't have won, but they came back from nowhere thanks to Glenn Maxwell's 201 not out. And in their final group match against Bangladesh, they defeated them by 8 wickets, which was a dominant performance. So that's Australia's road to the semi-finals. And it's been an up and down journey for Australia. They had a tough start in this tournament. They lost the first 2 games. Everyone was saying that Australia are probably not going to qualify for the semis. But then they turned things around. And they were able to win 7 games on the trot to qualify for the semi-finals. And here they are. Which you would expect from an Australian team. They always find a way from adversity. To be honest, they haven't been at their best in this tournament. They haven't been quite firing at 100% with the batting and bowling. It's been up and down throughout the World Cup. But they've done enough to win and to get to this position. Obviously, they've got a strong batting lineup. You've got Warner and Head and Smith and Marsh and Maxwell. You've got a good bowling attack as well with Cummins, Zampa and Stark and Hazelwood, capable of getting the job done, even though they haven't been quite firing at their best, but they still are capable of just doing enough to win, and that's what we've seen. Australia, this semi-final against South Africa, they'll be confident, Australia, knowing that Australia have a good record against South Africa in semi-finals. As we mentioned earlier, Australia have the ability to perform under pressure in knockout matches because most of the Australian side, just about all of them, have played in semi-finals in World Cups. Obviously in 2015, 2019, and also the T20 World Cup in the UAE in 2021. So most of the team have experience of playing in knockout matches. So that's an advantage for Australia over South Africa. Because for South Africa, they don't have many that have played in a semi-final before. This will be the first time for many of them, as we mentioned earlier when we talked about South Africa. So Australia have definitely got the edge over that when it comes to that department. Australia will be presented with many challenges in this semi-final against South Africa. And Australia do have some weaknesses that they need to try and remedy in order to win this semi-final against South Africa. And if they do that, then they can win. So obviously the weaknesses that they have, Australia, is the middle order batting. That's been a concern. Batting collapses. The middle order hasn't really done its job in this World Cup. It will need to do its job in this semi-final. The top order has done well. That's starting to get the job done. It's starting to fire. Over the last few games, the top order is starting to get things together. But the middle order needs to stand up. That's where Australia have struggled the most. Also, another weakness is the inability to take wickets in the first power play. Australia have struggled to take early wickets, get early breakthroughs. That's another weakness. And also the deaf bowling has been a problem as well. And Australia will need to fix those problems there. So Australia will need to improve in those areas of weakness. The top order is starting to get the job done. The middle order needs to stand up more. The deaf bowling needs to improve. They also need to take wickets in the first power play to put South Africa under pressure. In order for Australia to win this match against South Africa, they will need to bat well and they will need to bowl well. If they're batting first, bat well and set a good target for South Africa to chase. Because we know with South Africa, they do have a weakness when it comes to chasing. That's been well documented. So Australia will really need to make the most of it when batting first. If Australia are chasing, they will need to do the basics well. And I think the last game against Bangladesh, which they chased down the runs quite easily in the end, I think that will give them confidence, knowing that we can chase down totals if we put our mind to it. So for Australia, when they're chasing a score from South Africa, they just need to be clinical as they were against Bangladesh. Be clinical, get the job done, everyone contribute. In terms of the bowling, if they're bowling first, make sure they take wickets in the early power play. Put the South Africa top order under pressure in the middle order. Because as we've seen from South Africa, if you take early wickets, you expose the top order and the middle order, and you expose the tail enders. Because they do quite have a long tail, South Africa. you can put them under some sort of pressure. So Australia will need to be effective in the first power play. They've struggled in that area. They need to take early wickets. They do that, they can put South Africa under some sort of pressure. Also, the deaf bowling will need to be improved as well. Execute the skills, bowl Yorkers, changes of pace, be effective, bowl to your field. And Australia will need to remedy those problems. If they can do that, then Australia are a good chance of winning. Look, Australia haven't quite played at their best, but they've done enough to win. And this could be the game. Pat Cummins talked about it throughout the last few games, is that we haven't played the perfect game of cricket yet. Even though they've won, they haven't played their perfect game yet. And I think they're saving it for the semi-final, potentially. And for Australia, they will need to execute with the bat and with the ball. They've got a pretty good batting lineup and a bowling lineup. You have a look at the stats from the batting side of things. David Warner's been good, 499 runs. Mitchell Marsh, 426. Glenn Maxwell, 397. Marnus Labuschagne's been good, 286. And you've got Steve Smith with 268. And then you've got Travis Head with 130. He's only played a few games. So they've got the batters who can get the job done. The bowling attack can get the job done as well. Adam Zampa's been good, 22 wickets. Hazelwood, 12. Cummins and Stark with 10. And then you've got Glenn Maxwell with 5, Marcus Stoinis with 4, Mitchell Marsh with 2, the all-rounders who can chip in as well. So Australia have got the players, they've got the skills to get the job done. It's just they need to fix the middle order batting. They need to fix the ability to take wickets in the first 10 overs of the power play. They will need to fix the death bowling. And I feel like if Australia can do that, they can definitely win the semi-final against South Africa. With that being said, let's talk about the potential 11 for Australia in this semi-final against South Africa. So the potential 11 Australia may select for the semi-final against South Africa could be Warner, Head, Mitchell Marsh, Smith, Inglis, Maxwell, Stoinis, Stark, Cummins, Zampa and Hazelwood. That's a pretty good 11. Obviously, someone has to miss out, and it's probably going to be Marnus Labuschagne for Steve Smith. Obviously, that's probably the obvious choice to make there. That's a little bit harsh on Marnus, but, he's done pretty well in the tournament, played some good innings, he fielded well in the last game, but you have to make the tough calls when it's a semi-final, and Australia will want to put out their best 11. So it's a tough call, but, he's probably the one that has to miss out. So that could be the potential 11 that Australia may select for the semi-final against South Africa. In finishing up about Australia, before we move on, to finish off this preview of the semi-finals today, with Australia, they're capable of doing it. No one gave them a chance when they lost the first 2 games. Everyone said Australia are done. Put a line through them, they're done. They're going to finish bottom or second to last on the table, and it's going to be very embarrassing. But they've been able to turn things around. They haven't been at their best 100%. They've done enough to win. They've won 7 games in a row, and it's very important to play your best cricket towards the semi-finals and final, and that's what Australia are starting to do. So if they can fix the areas of weakness that they have, with the middle order batting, with the bowling, taking wickets in the power play and the death overs, bowling well there, then they can do enough to win against South Africa. Australia just know how to win World Cups. They've been here before, the players know what to do under pressure, and Australia just get the job done in knockout matches. So, for Australia, they're capable of winning. If they put in a good performance against South Africa, they can definitely get the job done. My final thoughts and concluding thoughts from this semi-final preview for this ICC Cricket World Cup for 2023. I think everyone is hoping that we have 2 exciting semi-finals. 4 teams that are playing in these semi-finals. Obviously, India, New Zealand, South Africa and Australia deserve to be here. They're being 4 of the best teams in this World Cup. All 4 teams will give it their all in these semi-finals, and I think we'll see some very good performances in terms of these semi-finals of this World Cup. And obviously, at the end of these semi-finals, 2 of the best teams will emerge, and will play off in the final on Sunday in Ahmedabad. Now, in terms of winners and potential winners who could win the semi-finals, let's talk about that before we finish off. India and New Zealand, semi-final number 1, should be a very good game. I think many people would say India should win, given that they're the favourites, that played well in the tournament. But don't discount New Zealand. New Zealand can get it done. India, they have the pressure and expectations of winning a semi-final. As we've talked about earlier in this episode, can they get the job done in a knockout match? That's been the problem for India over the last few ICC events and World Cups. They haven't been able to win semi-finals. But you would think India will start off as favourites to win that game. New Zealand underdogs, but you can't discount an underdog. And New Zealand always tend to play well when they're the underdogs and not really the favourites. But we shall see what happens there. The second semi-final, South Africa and Australia. Should be a good game. We know the history between South Africa and Australia in semi-finals. Obviously, the famous semi-final in 1999 at Edgbaston. Oh, this one could go either way. If South Africa can cope with the pressure and finally banish the demons of choking that they've been tagged with in World Cups, then they can get the job done. But I think Australia, given that they've been coming back well in this World Cup, they haven't quite played at their best. I think in this semi-final they could play their best cricket and they could get the job done. They just know how to win in semi-finals, Australia. They know how to win tournaments. They've got experience. Most of the players in the squad have played in semi-finals in World Cup events. Compare that to South Africa, who haven't got that experience. So I think that should get Australia over the line. So I think Australia should win, given that they've got that experience in semi-finals compared to South Africa. But the question is, South Africa, can they overcome the stigma of the choking tag? That will be the question. But as I said, we should be in for 2 exciting semi-finals, and may the best teams win the semi-finals and go on to the final and potentially win the whole World Cup. Thanks everyone for listening to our ICC Cricket World Cup 2023 semi-final preview. Stay tuned for more ICC Cricket World Cup 2023 episodes and live streams on the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on the semi-finals between India and New Zealand and South Africa and Australia in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.